when you pitch your story, make it big. Like, it's got to be attractive. It's not, how do I not lose? It's like, how do I make this a $1 billion outcome? It's tough, but I think the key is like, just do it. You know, like whatever you need to do, like chew on a pencil before to get in a smile, like listen to some bangers, like jump up and down, like whatever it is you need to do to just like psych yourself up and then go into the call. Like that energy will be palpable. Pitch big, be super confident, message that confidence. It's hard to do, you know. It's really hard to do that. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for taking the time, man. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about the experience that you had fundraising for Verisoul, and hopefully we can spread some insights that will help some future founders to better run their funding rounds more effectively.
Yes, follow everything, basically do everything I didn't do or don't do what I did, and then those will be good insights.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into some of the learnings, things you would do differently, things you're going to be thinking about differently the next time around. But let's start with Mardi Gras. This is before you raised your seed round, right?
This is after the seed round.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. So this was your use of funds for your seed round was
Yes.
Mardi Gras cakes.
Right.
Was that in your slide deck?
It was in the slide deck. Employee hires, customer support, sales, blow $1,000 on Mardi Gras cakes and get zero return on investment. As every start, it's a rite of passage for a startup. You raise some money, you come up with a bunch of fun ideas, most of which are terrible.
For sure.
And one of those was this Mardi Gras stunt. So basically, what happened is we hired Joey, who externed from Saren Capital, did an externship. He's a great buddy of mine from Bain and UVA. And we had this great idea to find 8 local potential prospects in Austin. And it was right during Mardi Gras. So we bought 8 Mardi Gras king cakes, right? These are the ones where you like find a baby in the cake. And we had some like really weird story about like, hope you find the human, not the bot in the cake, something like that. Cause we help companies prevent fake accounts, bots, stuff like that. Something was more clever than whatever I'm saying. And so we found all the addresses, got the cakes. We even made custom landing pages for literally every company. So we like did all the research, found the people. We're like, hey, here's why you need to stop fake accounts, bots, AI, stuff like that. So for instance, one of them was like Jasper AI. Basically, companies would sign up, abuse their AI credits, free trials, not pay, and then Jasper's out a bunch of cost on AI, and the companies don't convert. So like that's an example. Went to like 8 offices around Austin, took an entire day. The thing that you forget is like all these companies are basically remote now. So Jasper office, 0 humans. It's like it's like 50 people in Austin, no one in. Essentially, the only company we ended up finding someone at was Tiff's Treats, which was like the worst possible prospect. Basically, we were just trying to get a free cookie.
Yeah.
And then the other one that was terrible is like half of them were post office boxes. You don't know that. You like go to this address that's like in some kind of business mall, but it actually happens to be a virtual mailbox. Exactly. So got crushed. And then the other one that was insane was we went to Canva. Great, example of where they've got this content marketplaces. Fraudsters create a bunch of accounts. They post phishing content, whatever, on their UGC marketplace. They have their US headquarters is in Austin and beautiful new office on the east side. And we show up literally empty. There's one person there. She's like, yeah, the entire company is at an offsite in Australia. I think that's where they're headquartered. 150 people out of the office. They weren't going to return for like 3 weeks. The cake just got moldy and so that's how you don't spend your funds.
What did you do with all the cakes?
Well, we delivered them at the buildings anyway. And then for the ones where it was like a virtual post, like we just left the one at Jasper with like a note and said, hey, hope you get it. And we texted some of the people, but they never responded. So totally
Never
awful.
got a thank you or
Never
anything?
got a thank you. Just like the worst spend of time. But I feel like you have to go through these kind of rites of passage as a founder. I think one of the things that I've learned is like, when it comes to growth, what most companies really are going to find 1 or 2, 3 kind of channels, tactics that really work. And, part of what you're trying to do is just get in front of your ideal customer as much as possible to get feedback. And then once you do that, you can kind of find the right channel. And so this was just an idea of like, hey, how do we get face to face with like some prospects in a couple different verticals and test whether that's interesting. And so the theory was good. In practice, with physical versus remote, it didn't work, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to try a bunch of things and you don't know in advance what's going to work. So the most important thing is just experimentation and testing hypotheses and measuring results, and then being ready to shift gears or like double and triple down when
Yes.
you actually do hit on something that's working.
Exactly right. And I think the other just like broad tip that I have that I learned too, like later than I would have liked and would really focus on next time, if I were to redo what I've done so far, is counterintuitive to what most founders think, or counterintuitive to what it feels like. You don't want to ever shut off verticals. You feel like, hey, I can serve anyone if you're a SaaS horizontal product like we are. And it feels weird to say, hey, I'm going to only focus on like this one use case or like this one customer profile. But like, that's the only way to succeed. Is you have to find, if you have a horizontal product, you really need to find kind of a specific user, specific use case. We tried to go too broad too early. Another great example, like Clay, who's been super popular recently, they were super broad at first and only started getting traction when they said, hey, rather than be this like be all end all, connect APIs and do workflows, let's help sales leaders get better data through data enrichment workflows. And so it's really about honing your user profile as fast as possible, something I didn't do and or would have done earlier.
Yeah, you need to make that ICP as specific as possible, because if you try to talk to too many different personas, you're not going to resonate deeply with any of them. And as an early stage product, you really need to, the customer on the other side needs to feel like you are speaking like singularly to them and their problems.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah. And it's hard. It feels really counterintuitive because you're like, oh, and I think there's a lot of success stories of companies that are horizontal that like go broad, and you think that's kind of the way to do it. Those, a lot of times that's like repeat founders, so they've got some network or they've got something that kind of gives them the advantage or the ability to do that. But yeah, that's like probably my biggest learning from non-fundraising. And we'll obviously get into fundraising stuff, but that's one thing founders can do is like try to narrow down that as fast as possible. And this king cake thing was like one way we tried to do that, but absolutely failed.
You either win or you learn, right? So
yeah,
I
like that. I don't know if I've heard that, but I like that a lot.
What is the ICP that you landed on? Like, who is that specific customer that y'all have decided that you're going after that you really serve well? Is it Clay?
So it's kind of, it's really a use case, which is like the main use case is companies that have some cost of users creating a bunch of accounts and taking advantage of that aspect. So within PLG software, that's a good vertical for us only in specific use cases where there's like a data credit cost. So in the case of Clay, when you create a free account, you can get 1,000 data credits. That costs them money. They have to pay a data licensing fee. So this bot farm in Bangladesh that was like literally 20,000 different accounts scraping Clay's data, costing them hundreds of thousands a month, was then literally reselling it online. They had a website that you could go to and just like see all the leads they had. Super crazy. But yeah, so like within 30 days, they saved like $175K using us, and 40% of the accounts were fake. But so it's when there's like this unbounded economic opportunity. And so we also see that in a couple other verticals, like market research is a great one. If I can take unlimited surveys, I can earn unlimited money. People all over the world try to pretend to be in high value geographies like the US, Europe, et cetera, to take advantage of that. And then gaming is another really interesting one where, there's like entire Reddits devoted to farming economics, gaming economics like RuneScape or World of Warcraft or whatever. So we see a lot of value in gaming economies too.
Yeah, that's super interesting. You don't really think about the like gray market for just skimming a little bit off the top of these companies that offer like freemium sort of pricing plans.
Totally. Yeah.
And with like AI, you have to think that the ability for scammers to take advantage of these things is just going to go through the roof.
Oh,
So
completely. It's a great point. It's something we're seeing on the field because, you know, the way we think about our product is really, so our whole team comes from like the banking and kind of massive online platform identity and fraud team. So like I was the head of strategy at for the CTO at TransUnion doing identity and fraud. Our chief product officer for the Facebook user risk team, CTO at Capital One. And so really what we do is like, how can we bring the banking grade fraud and real-time fake account detection to verticals that just now, because of AI, are like completely under attack and underwater with fraud that, you know, maybe 2-3 years ago, they would never have felt that problem. And so there's a lot of greenfield opportunity, to your point, like of just companies that didn't need to stop fake accounts that now do. And for the ones that already did, the problem's harder. And, you know, so it's a great point. Like AI just makes it that much more explosive.
yeah, super interesting. All right, well, let's take a step back then to before the cakes. And let's talk about the seed round that y'all raised, which was announced in Q3 of 2023. Well, first off, actually, before we even talk about the seed round, give me the high-level overview on Verisoul. So what's your mission, and then what is your team building in pursuit of that mission?
Yeah, for sure. So Verisoul helps companies detect fake accounts, bots, AI in real time. So think like on Twitter, how many different bots, fake accounts are posting stuff in your comments, in your messages, etc. We integrate with platforms. We help them monitor their user base and make sure that users are real, unique humans, not bots, AI, fraud, trying to game the system, stuff like that. And so the origin story is pretty interesting here. So back in 2022, I was working with my co-founders. So Rain, I'll go with Neil first. He and I were same fraternity at University of Virginia, 2 years apart, always bonded over entrepreneurship. I always would recommend like starting a company with friends. I think it's an awesome way to do it. Like you really want to like the people you work with. It makes it that much more fun. And most startups fail because of co-founder breakups or like issues with the co-founding team. So awesome to have, a longtime friend as a co-founder. And then we met Rain, our chief product officer, on Y Combinator's co-founder matching. And he's amazing too, not only super sharp, but also fits right into a great, friendship team. We have such a fun time working together. Everyone's really bought into the mission of like, how do we make the internet safer? How do we help companies prevent fraud and literally save money? It's super positive mission. Like we are literally creating more trust between businesses and their users, saving them money and helping customers grow faster, right? So it's a really powerful, constructive mission for the company. Yeah.
I was listening to a podcast last week with the co-founders of Stripe. I don't know if you listened to this one. It was the All In pod.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And one of the main things that they think about as their mission is reducing fraud and building trust between merchants and consumers on the internet. And I think that is still such a big problem, even 30 years into like the internet existing.
Totally. They talked a lot about that actually. It seems like a real core focus for them.
Yeah.
And they're starting to have some product innovation around that. They've got a cool product called Radar that's really focused on, payment fraud. Really, is this like credit card going to be good or bad type thing? Yeah. But it's like an amazingly fast growing market. A lot of kind of prior identity companies are now focusing on authentication. Companies are focusing on it. For instance, like Stitch, who's I think like a Series B auth company, they are focusing a lot of their product development on fraud because it's just such a hair on fire problem for these companies, and the market's growing really fast.
So you came together in 2022 with Neil and then Rain. And so fast forward to 2023 when you're going out to raise your seed round. What was the narrative that you took to investors to communicate the fact that you were, ready to raise $3.4 million and build up the team and, get your product to market?
Yeah, super good question. And just to set the stage a little bit. So at the time, 2023, we'd already raised a pre-seed round a little bit to get us through the first year. That was a combination of 500 startups accelerator program, some early venture capital, friends, families, angels. That was about 500K. And those early supporters really helped us kind of get the ball rolling. And then it comes to 2023. We are basically just wrapping up kind of development on our product, basically pre-revenue still at this point, which is a pretty tough time to raise a seed round. So obviously traction matters, things like that. So we had different ways of showing that customer kind of pilots that we were doing, but still a little bit pre-revenue at that time, a little bit over a year ago, and pre-paying customers. So not an amazing story to go out and raise. But one of the things that I learned, a couple of things I learned through that process, and we'll kind of uncover those as we talk here. But one of the main things is you've got to put yourself in the mind of the investor, obviously. But the thing you have to think about is they need big returns. They need a couple companies to be huge. And so really what you need to talk about is not, hey, you're not trying to be reductive in like trying to find the minimum amount of money you could take in and, hey, we only need this much. Like you need to pitch this as, hey, there's a ton of opportunity here. We need to move fast. We need money immediately. Here's how we're going to go spend it. And so I actually find that a lot of companies under pitch or under ask for money at the wrong, maybe too late or too early, whatever. It's like they're kind of underselling or underrepresenting the opportunity. And if you do that, it actually makes it seem really small to the investor. It's like, well, you only need like $1 million. That's pretty small. And I think what happens is as people have conversations with investors, they're like, they get a couple no's, they start to rethink, they shrink the ask, they do all this stuff, and they kind of fold inwards. It's tough because confidence is so important in these calls. You have, regardless of if you just took 20 punches, you've got to walk in smiling, super confident, like, hey, we're the hottest deal right now. This market's absolutely massive, growing super fast. We need a lot of money, more than it probably even makes sense right now to go like capitalize. And so really one of the biggest takeaways is when you pitch your story, make it big. Like it's got to be attractive. It's not, how do I not lose? It's like, how do I make this a $1 billion outcome, right? So that's what you need to be thinking about.
Yeah, such a great point. I could see founders thinking that shrinking the ask would make it easier to close the round, but in reality, you're shooting yourself in the foot because if you put a number out there that is not going to allow you to achieve that, like to get you where you need to go, then there's nothing really in it there's nothing to get the investor excited.
Totally.
And you need to incite that like FOMO in them that
Yes.
like, yes, this could be a fund returner for us.
Completely. Yeah. You have to basically pitch it as a massive opportunity. And, you know, at the seed round, they're funding the people anyway. They're funding the market. They're funding the idea. And they're saying, hey, in the craziest outcome, could this be massive? And that's kind of what you need to show. It's like, hey, there's a potential for a massive outcome here. We're going to bring in more money at a higher valuation than we're worth because it's an early round. Like no seed company is worth 20 million bucks. You know, it's like it's like 5 people, right? It's the same thing like companies raising these massive rounds. Yeah, it seems outrageous, but like they're betting on the market. And the story is like, hey, yeah, there's a lot of players in here, but if we can, this is a massive market growing super fast. If we can capture some of the opportunity, this is $1 trillion outcome, whatever, right? So people are betting, they have the ability to afford making 8 bets that suck and are zeros because they're betting on 1 or 2 that are super winners. And so you just have to seem like you could be a super winner.
At the seed round, I feel like a narrative consists of 3 main buckets. There's market, team, and traction. Is it fair to say that your narrative more heavily emphasized the first 2 as opposed to the third with traction?
Yeah, I think that's totally right. Yeah, we didn't have an amazing traction story because we basically hadn't even launched our product. We were building it. So, you know, with Verisoul, part of what we're doing is building kind of all of these signals that banks use, they're buying from 10 to 12 different vendors. And we literally built all of those ourselves in-house from the work we've done over years. But that took like a whole year to do. So yeah, you kind of had to pitch basically on the vision and the market and like the team and like, hey, we've done this at some of the biggest companies. And the other thing that was really that connected the dots for one of our main investors was they had a portfolio of companies in their portfolio that had this problem, and they connected those customers, those portfolio companies with us, and had them kind of back channel and said, hey, would you guys pay for this service? And they were all like, yes, absolutely. Because otherwise, like, I have to go build it in-house or whatever, right? So I think one of the things founders can do is like, if you can sell to one of the portcos in an investor, try to get in front of them. It's going to be super powerful, both for you and the investor. You get a prospect, they get some back channeling.
Right. Is that how you ended up with Bitcraft on the cap table as like a gaming focused VC?
Yeah, exactly right. So Bitcraft is an amazing investor in kind of the consumer internet economy verticals. So they did Discord, Epic Games. They're some of our investors have invested in the largest gaming and internet economy businesses out there, and they all suffer from huge numbers of fake accounts, bots, fraud. And so that was a really good connect the dots moment where they could say, hey, not only is this a really good market, but we're uniquely positioned to be a financier here because we can accelerate the growth of Verisoul. And a lot of our, some of our portfolio companies have actually come from, some of our customers come from their portfolio companies. So it's totally borne out the thesis is actually borne out over the last year or two.
That's actually a really great little piece of advice that I hadn't heard before, which is like, if you're trying to find some investors who might be a good fit, look at your customer base and look at who their investors are, because those customers, especially if they provide a great testimonial, I think that holds a lot of weight with an investor.
Yeah, no, super true. And in fact, some of these will do it proactively. So we have a customer in the kind of gaming sector who they just raised a massive round maybe a year ago from some of the top tier 1 VCs, and those VCs were asking the CEO like, hey, what are some of the indispensable vendors you use? Like, we're always looking for cool companies. And so that CEO was kind enough to literally just recommend us to their venture capital funds that were like, hey, you should meet Henry from Verisoul. These guys are indispensable for our company and they're doing cool stuff. And, so I do think it's a great kind of way to find your customers' venture capital funds if they're startups or if they're in that space, and try to get connected through them or deliver a great service to those customers and then hope that they introduce you.
Totally. And if you are delivering a great service, that company wants to see you succeed too. So they're probably going to be very motivated to help you raise that next round.
Right, exactly. Right. You're like, you're a critical vendor for them. Like, they need you to be, capitalized.
Yeah.
Totally true.
That's awesome. All right. So walk me through your fundraise process, kind of start to finish, beginning with, we already kind of covered the narrative a little bit, but once you had defined your narrative, let's start from there. So how long did the process take? How many investors did you reach out to? How did you narrow down your investor pipeline? What materials did you prepare? Just kind of whatever kind of comes to mind in terms of the tactical steps that you went through to end up closing the round.
Yeah, cool. So why don't we break it out into a couple phases? So I'll call, let's say, like pre-raise. What are we doing beforehand? We talked about the narrative, but there's also some stuff we did on pulling data, making materials, creating a data room, stuff like that. That's going to be helpful for folks. 2 is maybe like kind of getting in touch with investors, or kind of building like our target list and how do we go find them and how do we get all them in our funnel. Then I'll talk about like what was the actual narrowing process. And then maybe lastly would be, I'll talk through kind of what did the kind of closing, how do we find, once we found our lead, how do we end up closing the round? So maybe those 4 things. So we we're part of the 500 Startups Accelerator program. Accelerators can be very helpful in terms of both giving you introductions to mentors, angels, et cetera, that also have connections. But also part of this is we did our demo day like in April of 2023. So the idea was, hey, let's basically kick off our raise at that moment. Use that demo day as a way to kick off the raise. In hindsight, I think it's almost better to use towards the end of a round, and I'll get to like, maybe we do lessons learned kind of at the end and what we changed, and I'll just go through what we did. But so kind of in advance of that, we did preparation. So we set up a data room with things like pilots we were running, product decks, some founder documents, just some legal documents to show all that. It was good. Financial model, market sizing. I think market sizing, given we are so focused on the market idea and kind of vision here, did some really detailed bottom-up market sizing analysis that I think people really find helpful. Is like, not just, hey, what's the Forbes thing, but really bottoms up, which is like, what are the verticals you're serving? How many people are in that ICP? What's the average sales price? How much of that can you capture? That type of stuff can be really helpful for investors because you're the expert on your market. And then, so once we prepped all, deck, stuff like that, we had kind of two versions of our deck. One was a send ahead that was short. And then one was kind of an in-meeting deck that had a bunch of appendix slides that we could turn to during meetings. So that's the pre-raise process. Then we did our demo day. So I guess maybe before the demo day, we reached out to a lot of investors through 500, got kind of warm intros there. And one other really good tactic I have for folks that I think is an amazing strategy: find people who don't necessarily look like investors, but could be connected to investors, people like mentors or angels or whatever, and ask for feedback on your pitch. So people don't like being sold to, and people don't want to feel pressure to give money, but people love giving feedback and feeling like an expert. And so one of the things we did that was really helpful is found mentors or angels that are connected to, VCs and others, and said, hey, will you provide feedback on our pitch, on our deck, whatever? And you start doing some of those. And what you find is that if you do well, they will intro you to people. VCs love to be connected. They connect founders to founders, investors to founders, whatever. So they're all connectors. And so if you can take advantage of that or kind of lean into that, get feedback on your deck, and if you do well, they will disseminate you to trusted people. And you need to get investors through warm intros. There's no other way. They won't look cold. So that's one of the best ways to get a 1 to N set of warm intros, and people will take a cold message to watch your pitch and help, most likely. So that's one strategy that we used before the demo day of get some people conversations going, invite them to the demo day, etc. And then demo day itself, we did have a lot of investors that were there. They watched and enjoyed our pitch. They reached out. That probably led to another, 30 to 40. And then we did our own kind of warm intro network through those people. So after conversations I would have with investors, I'd always say, hey, are there any folks you think we should talk to as well? And if the meeting goes well, they might also introduce you there. So that was kind of the demo day raise kickoff process. And then the conversations themselves, we spread those out maybe a month and a half before we found our lead. So we kind of aligned on our lead in June. Very early June. I remember because I was in Italy with my now wife, but girlfriend at the time. And we were doing final legal contracting kind of early June. So a month or two to find the lead. I typically think it's better to find a lead first than to find follow-on. Although I will say it's not necessarily chicken or the egg. I think both can come first. So if you find a great lead that sets the valuation of the round, it's very easy to get additional capital in. They'll intro you to a lot of investors there. So it's a good way to immediately extend to your network. Also, the follow-on diligence is going to be lighter, things like that. But contrarily, it can be great to find some committed capital early. That gives you momentum right off the bat. And then it becomes easier to find the lead. If you're hey, we've got, a quarter, you don't want to have too much of the round committed, but a quarter of the round committed, or some portion that says, hey, there's folks at the table here. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So you sourced, say, 30 to 40 of your initial conversations through the 500 Startups demo day, maybe another a dozen to a couple dozen through the network, which I really like that concept of asking for feedback and then using those people as a catapult into the warm intros. So overall, how many introductory pitches would you say that you had with VCs trying to find that lead?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, probably 50, maybe 60.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to remember because the number I have in my head is like wholesale, all of the ones that we talked to throughout the whole process, which include after we find the lead and then after they introduced us to other investors. But yeah, I mean, probably 50 to 60 at least. I mean, a lot of people will recommend 100 or so. So, I don't think, 60 or so is not unreasonable here.
And what would you say is the conversion rate from introductory call to follow up and more involved kind of conversations, like at each step of the process? And how did you think about breaking down that process as well, trying to get to the lead?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. One of the high level one of the biggest learnings for me during the whole process is momentum, right? And this is probably something that we'll do differently and kind of, between you and me, like have had a few folks asked to preempt our next round. And so we're having these conversations right now a little bit. But one of the things
it's going to be great once we get this out to YouTube. And you're
yeah, right. And explode. Oh shit. I didn't know he was going to say this publicly. I won't mention any names, but there are a few funds, probably 4 or 5 that we're talking with in, third round, more detailed conversations. Like
start with an A and end with a Z.
No.
We'll cut that.
But anyways, so biggest thing is momentum. It's kind of like, showing up to a party. Like an investor doesn't want to be the first one there. They want to go when other people are there. If no one's there, like, let me know when people come and I'll come, right? Kind of thing. And so there is that. It's a really human driven, psychology driven process as much as, and I think growth stage, it becomes different, right? Seed stage, again, you're betting on the market, you're betting on the founders. And part of that is, can you get people around you that are interested? And so it's really important at the seed stage to be messaging that momentum. And so there's 2 ways to do it. One is you, probably the best strategy, which we didn't do, but I think is a really good one that we're trying to kind of do now, which is you build really good relationships with VCs over a longer period of time. And that's something we've been intentional about over the last kind of year or so since that last round. And they'll know kind of where you are. You continue to update them if you can continue to show meaningful progress and talk through some of the challenges, but you obviously want to optically message that things are going pretty well. But if they can monitor you over time, get to know you, they have a much stronger likelihood of like investing in you. And also what will happen is after you have a lot of conversations, people will say, hey, I think you guys like are ready. And if you can show that momentum with them, they might say, hey, we're interested in like moving to the next round of conversations. Let's get more formal here. At which point that's a good signal that, hey, we're in a good spot in our timing to kick off a raise, or even like wait a little bit longer until you have nearly a term sheet or have a term sheet. And then you almost kick off the process. It allows you to have an incredible amount of momentum. People will talk. You can always say, hey, we need to move fast here. We've got XYZ term sheets on the table. And so you get that momentum. Without that term sheet in hand, one of the ways to do that is show that you are super well prepared, meaning you may have already had those materials before, and or continue to message the idea that you've got like other folks at the table. And so when it came down to it, we had probably 2 or 3 folks at the end that I would say probably 2 VCs that were kind of deciding between towards the end. And then BigCraft was the best partner for the business at the time. So we decided they were an awesome, long-term strategic partner, kind of 1 + 1 = 3, as we talked about. But really interestingly, like I had met them a year before. It actually was like, hey, we built the relationship over the course of a year and we got to know each other. And it was like a great fit, personality wise and things like that. So I wouldn't sleep on like not spending a crazy amount of time, but meeting investors and keeping them updated and building those relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard a phrase that I really liked recently that goes, VCs invest in lines, not dots. And I think that points to the importance of sort of that like continuous fundraise prep. Not that you want to devote a significant amount of your time to it, because you obviously need to be building the business. That needs to be the focus, but it can make the actual fundraise so much less painful if you just put in the time to send a quarterly update to a couple of folks and like help them, give them like a couple of dots that they can connect and see that you're on an upward trajectory.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And basically what we see is when we do that, every time we send a newsletter, at least five, maybe 8 of the VCs that are on that will be like, hey, this is awesome. Like, would love to catch up in more detail. And that, sending those updates every 6 or 12 weeks is that kind of line for them. But also then it says it gives you that touch point where they can just say, oh, this is sweet. Like, let's talk,
Yeah.
And so then it allows you to have a deeper conversation and continue at, to get deeper on the business. And then again, then when they feel like you're ready or you're right for them, then they'll want to move to the next set of steps.
So you mentioned that it was about a month and a half from introductory meetings to choosing your lead. In that time, you mentioned how you need to kind of generate momentum. Did you very tightly time box kind of like the different steps in the process? Or how do you think about like the organizational component of fundraising that you can use to put investors like on the hot seat a little bit and force them to kind of like move forward with you in the process?
Yeah, it's a great question. Something we didn't do as effectively as I'd want to do next time. So I think we had, a decent process from just use Google Sheets for a simple CRM. Hey, where are we in the process with them? Pretty easy to do. I don't think it's necessary to over-engineer it with like a ton of software, but part of it is messaging the momentum just verbally. Like, hey guys, just as a heads up, let me know if you're interested or not, because I've got XYZ meetings next week and like we're at final discussions with N number of partners. And that provides like hey, it doesn't seem needy. And it's also messaging, hey, there's additional traction, that like you're either in or you're out. And that message is that you're confident in where you're headed. And that means to them, it signals like momentum, right? If you hear someone say, hey, are you in or out? It's kind of like, I'm indifferent, just let me know. It's kind of like flirting or dating, it's a little bit like that. You kind of have to play hard to get. You kind of got to play momentum. You kind of got to go hot and cold. And you have to be weirdly psychological about it. And I think the more time boxed you can be, if you can fit a lot of investors into a small window, you're going to be really well off. It can be easier said than done, I think, because you're not always going to get all your investor meetings at once. And I do think it's one of those things that's glamorized a little bit, like, oh, here's how to do it. It's like, all right, not every company can get 100 meetings in 2 weeks. Like, it's just not possible. Right. So, and everyone wants to say, oh, do it this way. I mean, and I think there's 2 ways. If you could do that, amazing. The other way is you message momentum, and just when in your communications, always be pushing for like showcasing additional momentum or additional traction, or like, hey, we just landed XYZ customer. Like, are you still interested or not? Probably going to raise the valuation or what, like something, stuff like that, where it's like, hey, we're moving.
Yeah. Raising venture capital is a sale, right? Like you have to run it as a sales process. And so the same kind of tactics that you would deploy trying to close a deal with a customer apply with VCs.
Totally agree. Yeah, totally agree. And I think the other thing that so a couple things I've found is investors respect when you turn the table a little bit on them. If you seem like you'll take anyone's money, that showcases neediness. And it's also, you should be asking them hard questions too. I mean, weirdly, this is super weird, but on every meeting I ask an investor, like, why did you join X fund? And they're like, whoa, what a good question. I'm like, really? That is a good question. Like, no one asks you that. But I think if you can turn the tables a little bit, and you should be asking, like, why did you join this fund? why this one specifically? What do you invest in? Like, why do you want to invest in my company? Like, I can choose from N number of investors. Like, why are you the best person? And it's kind of how you say it, it's what you ask, but it's kind of how you say it. And then I think the last thing is ask for, as you get past the first or second meeting, ask for introductions to their founders. Like, hey, we're at this point with like Z number of investors. I'm asking all of them for at least one introduction to a founder. Can you provide that? And that makes it seem like, hey, these guys are running a tight ship. They're choosing between people. I got to get a really good person in front of them. And it creates that FOMO.
I like that insight of turning the tables on the VC. I think it does shift the power dynamics a little bit. And some founders may be like intimidated going into a meeting with a VC and think that they're the ones who are just going to be answering all the questions. But if you can ask some questions to the VC, it also turns it into much more of like a real just conversation as opposed to an interview, right?
Exactly. If you're talking 70% in a sales meeting, like that's a bad meeting, right? It's like, you want to be brainstorming. You want to be conversational. Like you want to know why they're going to be and testing for why they're going to be a forcing for an accelerating function, a force multiplier for your business. If you come in saying, hey, we are really, really stringent about who we're bringing on here. Like we're not going to just partner with anyone. They'll respect that, they want to hear that because it makes it seem like what's best for your business.
You mentioned that you were trying to decide between Bitcraft and a couple of other VCs for your lead. What were some of the deciding factors that led you to choose Bitcraft? And how do you think generally about choosing the right fit VC for your round?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think each round can be different too. So what we decided for that round might be different for the next and things like that. But one thing is, do they share the vision of your company, right? Like, do they understand and just natively get the vision, and are they bought into that? Like, one of the things I loved about the team there is like, look, they've felt this problem firsthand in their portcos. They're all in kind of the gaming and internet space. So they know how awful it is. They've felt the problem. They've been looking for solutions. Like they truly get the vision, which I love. They're there for it, right? They're partners with you. Two is fit, like I really like the team. They're awesome people. They're super fun. They're really sharp. They ask great questions, but part of our relationship is they have a lot of trust in our team. And so they provide feedback and are helpful, but never invasive or harmful. And I think that's like an amazing style for a seed founder because, at the seed stage, like you're going to be experimenting, you're going to be learning, you're going to fail, you're going to make mistakes. And you want someone who's kind of supportive, is asking questions to get you in the right mindset, but is not guiding your hand too much. You kind of need to learn these things on your own. So they were an awesome partner for those reasons. I do think, as you start to get, further down your track, you want to find folks that maybe are a little bit more specialized in exactly what you do. Like, have they, for instance, if you're building a marketplace, like you might want, your Series A, like you probably want like a Bill Gurley-esque that's built two-sided marketplaces and is an expert in that, right? And so I think at each round it can be different.
Shifting gears a little bit, what was the best piece of advice you received during your fundraise process? Could have been from a VC or from someone, from a mentor, from a fellow founder, or the worst. You could go in either direction.
Okay, that's helpful. It's a good question. I think the probably best compendium advice is the Ryan Breslow book. Okay, he open sources like funders, and say what you want about Ryan Breslow. Like, I'm not, a super fan of that guy. He's a bit eccentric. Yeah, very polarizing, and whatever. I do think he's got this open source kind of book on fundraising, and it has a lot of really good nuggets. I'd suggest people read it. It kind of highlights this, how do you maintain momentum? And it's really all about that human psychology element. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. I think that's probably where I would go.
That's a good one. I haven't actually read that. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, no, it's super short read, like audiobook. I think it's like an audiobook too, free. So I listen to it on audio. It's probably like 2 hours of content, super light, but it's maybe like a little impractical in that only some founders can do it. And also, like, I think a lot of his claims in his companies were maybe fraudulent. Like, I don't know if his companies were actually doing anything as they say they were. So take it with a grain of salt, but the principles are pretty effective.
Love it. Is there a piece of common fundraising advice that you hear people give that you disagree with?
I tend to not like, I guess I don't even really know what the super common advice is anymore, because I don't listen to a lot of that stuff. But I think the biggest thing is probably the idea that the idea that you have to have like all these customers and all these like amazing things to raise. I think the biggest thing that you need is like confidence, a really clear story, and like why this can be massive vision. And I think people overestimate the amount you need, like a massive litany of proof points. I do think you want those, but you don't need like as many customers as you think. Like a lot of it can be done with customer conversations, or like, how do I prove that the market demand exists? I don't need to have like an amazing product and amazing customer set, but it's like, how do I prove that this is a massive market and people are demanding the thing I want to go build? And so I think one of the things that investors will always say to you is like, oh yeah, let me know when you have more traction. I do think that's kind of a bit of a cop out. And a lot of founders think, oh, I just need like one more customer, one more thing. But it can be like a bit of a messaging issue, I think, for the founders. So maybe I don't know if that's like bucking common wisdom, but.
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, you look at like a checklist of items that you might see online as like, you need to be checking all these boxes before you can go out and raise a round, but you show that doesn't always necessarily apply. Like they're really, especially at the seed round, they're just trying to, at any stage of raising venture capital, right? There's a certain set of risks that a VC is looking to like mitigate.
Yes.
And so if you can mitigate the market risk by having 20 paying customers and like several $100,000 of ARR, like that's one way to do it. And then in that case, the story kind of like tells itself, but you can also tell the story and you can have proof points in other like areas that, so like there's multiple ways to go about it. And
exactly right. Like simple example would be like Didi, the car company and the car sharing company in China. It's like, all right, they probably didn't go get customers. They're probably like, look at Uber in the US, like give me a bunch of money and I'll go do that. Like that's the market proof, right? Yeah. I don't need to go build a car company or a car sharing company that gets 100,000 users. I can just be like, hey, I'm going to go build this thing that like already has 50 million users in the US, like $500 million will go do it, right?
The VCs obviously have to believe that you can build it.
Right, yeah. In that case, the team, the risk is the team, right? So if you can like just point to, if you can, to your point around market like risks, that risk becomes execution and team, but it's like, you can show, hey, that market exists and there's going to be traction if we can build a product that works.
You already talked in a couple of different areas about like mistakes that you made and things that you wish you'd done a little bit differently. As you look ahead to your next round, what are some of the key things that you will be thinking about in terms of just ways that you'll approach this differently compared to raising your seed?
Good question. So I think definitely it's really going to be tighter timelines. I think one is we've been building relationships over a longer period of time, so that's helpful. Two is the plan is really try to basically kick off the round once there is already existing interest. So generate the interest kind of before the round even begins, and then you can run a better process. I think those are probably the main things. The other thing I would say that's maybe like bucking common wisdom and then maybe applies to this question is like, I think the the standard of like pre-seed, seed, A, B is getting a little muddied. And I do think there's folks that are doing kind of like seed 2 or A2 or whatever, where they're doing like, or Clay just did their B2. They're kind of like getting additional capital in kind of at the same, not the same terms, but in the same round, quote unquote, to try to accelerate faster into the next round. So there's like, you know, folks that'll raise a second seed or like a mini, you know, an addendum to the first seed, things like that. I think that's part of a little bit what's changing in the market. Maybe partially because folks are worried of the zombie corn type thing where you invest all this money with like too much runway, and maybe folks are like, hey, why don't we give you a little bit less money and check in a little more frequently? So I think that's maybe a couple things we'll think about.
It does feel like if you have the infrastructure in place, it is more feasible to raise like smaller chunks of capital, maybe more frequently than it was 5 years ago, just because, for example, investors are much more comfortable like making investments like virtually without having spent a ton of time in person and that kind of thing. So I could definitely see that contributing to that trend. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you know, you don't want to get too little capital, so you're like always raising. That's a terrible outcome too. And you also still, as I said earlier, you want to be pitching like the big vision. So you don't want to be like, hey, I need 300K. You need, you know, it's like, hey, let's get a couple $1 million here. And then you might raise like just a bit of a smaller round at the beginning and then add some later if there's like, you know, a bunch of folks who want to get in. Or
yeah. But if you've hit a milestone with your company that has tangibly like de-risked a big part of your business or leveled you up in a specific way, that might not be a bad time to think about.
Yeah. That's a great way to phrase it. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Well, we're coming up on time here. Is there any other little bits of wisdom? This has been an awesome conversation, by the way.
Yeah, no, super. We've pulled out some really cool insights, actually. Like a lot of I feel like being an extrovert, I do a lot of thinking while talking. So like some of these are like net new things I'm kind of like just extemporaneously thinking about now. But no, nothing else comes to mind. I think it's hard, but the kind of biggest counterintuitive things that we talked about are like, hey, pitch big, be super confident, message that confidence. And it's hard to do, you know, it's really hard to do that.
Actually, I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
How did you, I'm sure that you got quite a few no's in your fundraise process. How did you maintain that confidence and come into every investor pitch like with that smile on your face?
Yeah, no, that's the hard part, is like, it's very hard to go to someone and say, hey, you need to give me a lot of money because I'm going to go do XYZ thing, when two other people just said, hey, no, I'm not going to do that. So it's tough, but I think the key is like, just do it, you know, like whatever you need to do, like chew on a pencil before to get in a smile, like listen to some bangers, like jump up and down, like whatever it is you need to do to just like psych yourself up and then go into the call, like that energy will be palpable. Yeah. Like if you are like, let's, you know, this company is, you know, whatever, just get hyped up, like, you know, do
Flexing
something
in the mirror.
Just, whatever you do to get hyped up. Yeah. Pretty boy. For me, it's like karate kicks and, you know, whatever, like just do that and come in, like they'll feel that. Every messaging point matters. Like no one knows your business. And what a lot of founders do is like, they give this pitch, they get tired, whatever. They think it's mundane to them because they've given it 100 times. It's totally new to the investor. If you come in sounding like, hey, you know, here's the company, you know, if it sounds like you've given it 100 times, it's going to fall flat. Come into every meeting like they've never heard this. Like, this is a revolutionary thing you're doing. Why is it so interesting? Why should they invest? Like, and I think one of the things I just saw at a conference is like, founders, you ask them what they do, they're like, oh yeah, we do 3, 4, you know, XYZ thing. As if I've heard it a million times. I'm like, dude, I don't know what you do. Like, be psyched about it, you know? Yeah. So part of it is just remember that no one has heard this content. It's totally new. Make it seem really interesting and really new, like a new market or a new product, or like, why is it they should invest? If you feel that ahead of time, like that'll come out in the pitch.
That mindset piece is a really good place to end, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. This has been really great, man. Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing some of this wisdom. I learned a lot about Verisoul as well. And yeah, looking forward to continuing to follow along with the journey here.
Thank you, dude. Yeah, we pulled out some awesome insights. Hopefully people have get something out of it. And thanks for having me. Super fun. Yeah. Awesome.
Oh, man.
Good to see you.